The 40 warriors stood in perfect silence outside Willa's cabin, their faces painted with symbols she had never seen before. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. They simply waited. Willa pressed her back against the rough-hewn wooden door, her heart hammering so hard she was certain they could hear it through the walls. Yesterday, she had helped a lost child cross the river. Just a simple act of kindness for a little girl with a bad limp and tears in her eyes. Today, an entire war party had found her. But something was deeply, terribly wrong with this picture. Warriors didn't travel in perfect, silent formation just to threaten a 12-year-old girl living alone at the edge of the world. They didn't bring ceremonial feathers woven into their hair for a simple confrontation, and they absolutely, certainly did not kneel. Yet that's exactly what the leader did. He was a mountain of a man, his face a mask of hardened leather and grim determination, and he dropped to one knee in the dirt outside her door. Then the man next to him did the same, and the next. One by one, in a wave of silent, shocking deference, all 40 warriors knelt before her tiny, rotting cabin. The man in front held something in his outstretched hands, something that glinted in the morning sun like polished metal, but it felt ancient, significant in a way that made Willa's skin crawl with a recognition she couldn't place. She had seen that object before, just yesterday. It had been clutched in the small, desperate hands of the limping child she had carried across the rushing, angry water. The child who had whispered something in a language Willa somehow understood, despite never having heard it in her life. The child who had looked at her with eyes that seemed far too old, far too knowing for a girl her age. The child who had vanished into the dense forest without so much as a glance back, leaving only a trail of wet footprints that seemed to lead nowhere at all. Now Willa stared through the tiny crack in her door at the kneeling warriors, at the object in their leader's hands, and one terrible, impossible realization began to form in the back of her mind. The child she had helped wasn't just any lost native, and these warriors weren't here for revenge. They were here because she had done something that had changed everything. Something that broke a rule she didn't even know existed. Something that meant she was no longer the orphaned girl living alone by the river. But what she had become, that was the question that made her hands shake as she reached for the door handle. Willa's fingers trembled as she turned the heavy wooden latch. The screech of the wood echoed in the unnatural silence. Through the narrow gap, she could see the lead warrior's weathered face, marked with crisp blue and white paint that ran in precise, ritualistic lines down his cheekbones. His eyes weren't filled with anger or threat. They held something far more unsettling: respect. The kind of profound respect reserved for elders, for chiefs, for equals, not for 12-year-old orphans who ate scavenged berries and slept on a bed of straw. She pulled the door wider, and the cool morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of leather, horses, and something else, something ceremonial and smoky, like burnt sage. The warrior in front slowly rose to his feet, and Willa had to crane her neck to look up at him. He stood nearly twice her height, with broad shoulders that blocked out the sun, casting a long, intimidating shadow over her. In his cupped hands lay a silver pendant, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to dance and shift in the light. "You helped my daughter cross the river," he said. His English was careful but clear, each word carrying the weight of the mountains behind them. "You carried her when she could not walk." Willa's throat felt as dry as sandpaper. His daughter. The limping child had been his daughter. Not just any child, but the daughter of what was clearly a chief, a leader of immense importance. She remembered the moment yesterday with a terrifying clarity. She'd spotted the small figure struggling at the water's edge, her left leg dragging uselessly behind her, tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. She was hurt, Willa managed to whisper, her voice barely a squeak. "I couldn't just leave her there." The chief's stone-faced expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. a slight relaxation of his shoulders. Behind him, the other warriors remained kneeling, their eyes fixed on the ground, their stillness a testament to their discipline. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, and Willa realized that whatever she had done yesterday had consequences far beyond a simple act of kindness. This wasn't a thank you. This was something else entirely. "My daughter told me what you did," the chief continued, his voice resonating in the quiet air. "How you waded into water that reached your chest. How you carried her across when the current tried to sweep you both away. How you asked for nothing in return." Willa nodded, remembering the terrifying moment when the river had grabbed at her ankles, threatening to pull them both under into the churning rapids downstream. The child had been heavier than she looked, a dead weight of pain and exhaustion, and Willa's arms had burned with the effort of keeping them both above water. But she had also remembered something else. The way the child had looked at her afterward, with those knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to Willa's soul. "She also told me," the chief said, extending the pendant toward Willa, "that you spoke to her in our language." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Willa stared at the silver pendant, her mind racing back to yesterday. She remembered comforting the crying child, whispering reassuring words as she struggled through the current. But she had spoken in English, hadn't she? She had always spoken only English, the language her parents had taught her before the fever took her mother and grief stole her father. Yet now, with the chief's words hanging in the air, fragments of memory began to surface. Words that had felt natural on her tongue, words that the child had responded to with immediate understanding, words in a language Willa had never learned, but somehow, inexplicably, knew. The chief stepped closer, so close that Willa could see her own small, terrified reflection in the polished silver of the pendant. And for a split second, she could have sworn she saw something else looking back at her. Something that explained why 40 warriors had traveled through the night to find her. Something that would change everything she thought she knew about herself. Willa's mind raced back to yesterday afternoon. The sun had been burning hot, and the river ran faster than usual, swollen and brown from the mountain rains. She had been washing her only dress in the shallows, the worn fabric thin under her scrubbing fingers, when she heard the crying. It wasn't the normal sound of forest animals, but the desperate, pain-filled sobs of a child. She had followed the sound downstream, her bare feet slipping on the wet stones, until she found the girl collapsed on the opposite bank. Her leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, dark blood seeping through a tear in her deerskin leggings. The water between them had been a treacherous, churning mess, filled with rocks and debris from upstream. Most adults would have hesitated, would have run for help. But Willa had seen the raw fear in the child's eyes, the way she kept looking over her shoulder, as if something were chasing her. Without a second thought, Willa had plunged into the current. The crossing had been a nightmare. The water grabbed at her like hungry, icy hands, trying to drag them both downstream toward the roar of the rapids. The child had wrapped her arms tightly around Willa's neck, whispering words that somehow soothed the panic rising in Willa's chest. Words that felt familiar, like half-remembered lullabies from a forgotten dream. "You said, 'Be strong, little sister,'" the chief told her now, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "You said, 'The ancestors watch over us.' You spoke these words in Lakota, a language my daughter has heard since birth, a language no white child should know." Willa's legs felt weak. She gripped the doorframe for support as the chief's words sank into her bones. She remembered saying something to comfort the girl, but the exact words had felt automatic, instinctive, like breathing, like they had always been there, waiting just beneath the surface of her conscious mind. "I don't understand," Willa whispered. "I've never learned any other language. My parents, they only spoke English." The chief's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been pity in his dark, penetrating eyes. Behind him, several of the kneeling warriors exchanged quick, meaningful glances, as if they knew something she didn't, something that explained why they had traveled all this way. "Tell me about your parents," the chief said gently. "Tell me how you came to live alone by this river." Willa's stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot. She had spent 3 long years trying not to think about that night. The fever that took her mother, leaving her frail and cold in their small bed. The way her father had sat by the river for days afterward, staring at nothing, a hollowed-out shell of the man he once was. How he had stopped eating, stopped speaking, until one morning she woke up and found him gone. No note, no goodbye, just gone. "They died," she said simply, the lie easier than the truth. "I've been alone since I was 9. The chief nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. He turned to one of the warriors behind him and spoke in rapid Lakota. The warrior rose and approached, carrying a heavy leather bundle that he set carefully at Willa's feet. "My daughter also told me something else," the chief said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, pulling her attention back to him. "She said that when you carried her across the river, you sang an old song, a mourning song that only the women of our tribe sing for the dead." Willa's world tilted again. She had sung? She couldn't remember singing, but even as she tried to deny it, fragments of a melody drifted through her mind. Low, haunting notes that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in her bones, a song of grief and hope that her conscious mind had never learned. The chief gestured toward the leather bundle at her feet. "There are things you need to know about yourself, Willa. Things about where you really came from. Things about why your parents brought you to this river, and why they never told you the truth." He paused, studying her face with those penetrating eyes. "But first, you must choose. You can stay here, alone with your questions, or you can come with us and learn who you really are." Willa stared down at the leather bundle, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 3 years of living alone had taught her to be cautious, to trust no one completely. But something deep inside her chest was pulling toward these strangers, toward answers she had been too afraid to seek. A part of her she never knew existed was yearning for home. "What's in there?" she asked, her voice trembling as she pointed at the bundle. The chief knelt down and carefully unwrapped the leather ties. Inside lay several items that made Willa's breath catch in her throat. A small dress made of the softest deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of blue and white. A pair of tiny moccasins, worn but well made. And at the bottom, a daguerreotype photograph that made the world spin around her. The photograph showed a young native woman holding a baby. The woman's face was serene, beautiful, with the same dark, almond-shaped eyes that Willa saw in her own reflection every morning in the river. But it was the baby that made her legs give out. The baby had light, wispy hair and pale skin, and around its neck hung the exact same silver pendant the chief had just offered her. "Your mother," the chief said quietly, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "Your real mother. Her name was Ayana, which means eternal blossom. She was my sister." Willa's hands shook as she picked up the photograph. The woman in the picture looked nothing like the pale, sickly woman who had raised her until she was 9. This woman looked strong, proud, alive. But my parents? They were white. They told me I was their daughter. "They were good people who loved you," the chief said, his voice gentle but firm. "But they were not your blood. When you were barely walking, raiders attacked our winter camp. Many died, including your mother. In the chaos, you disappeared. We searched for months but found no trace. We thought you had been taken by the raiders or killed in the wild." He gestured toward the photograph. "Your mother made this pendant the day you were born. She said it would always bring you home to us. We never stopped hoping. Willa's mind reeled. Everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie, crumbling away like sand. How did I end up with them? The people who raised me? We believe the couple who raised you found you during the attack. Perhaps you wandered away in the confusion. Perhaps they found you, lost and afraid, and took you in as their own. They gave you a good life, Willa. They loved you, but they could never give you the truth about who you are. She looked up from the photograph, her eyes scanning the 40 warriors still kneeling in her yard. Why did you all come? Why so many? Because, the chief said, his voice heavy with significance, you are not just my niece. Your mother was a medicine woman, a healer of great power. The daughter she bore was prophesied to return when our people needed healing most. We have been waiting 12 long years for you to reveal yourself. Willa felt dizzy. A prophecy? Healing? I don't know anything about healing. I can barely take care of myself. Yesterday, when you carried my daughter across that river, you did more than save her life. You showed the courage and compassion of your mother. You spoke our language because it lives in your blood. You sang our songs because they are part of your soul. The chief stood and extended his hand toward her. My daughter's leg was not just broken yesterday. Our healer said the bone was shattered. She might never walk properly again. But this morning she woke up and ran to tell me about the girl who saved her. Her leg. It had healed, completely, overnight. Willa stared at him, her mouth agape. That's impossible. Is it? The chief asked. Or is it simply something you don't understand yet? The 40 warriors rose as one, a silent, powerful movement. Their eyes were fixed on Willa, filled with a mixture of hope and reverence that made her stomach churn with a responsibility she wasn't ready for. Whatever choice she made now would change everything. But as she looked at the photograph of her real mother, at the baby with her own face, she realized that everything had already changed the moment she decided to help a limping child cross a river. Willa looked around her tiny, dilapidated cabin. She looked at the few possessions that had been her entire world for 3 years. A wooden bowl her adoptive father had carved. A faded quilt her adoptive mother had sewn. A small knife for cutting kindling. Everything that remained of the life she thought was hers. Now it all seemed to belong to someone else, to a ghost of a girl who had never really existed. If I come with you, she said slowly, the words feeling heavy in her mouth, what happens to me? What happens to this place? The chief followed her gaze around the small, bare room. This cabin will remain. If you choose to return someday, it will be here waiting. But Willa, our people are in great trouble. A sickness has spread through our camps, one that our healers cannot cure. Children are dying. Elders who have survived wars and famines are growing weak. We need someone who can bridge 2 worlds, someone who understands both the old ways and the new. Willa felt the weight of their expectations settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. An entire nation's hope was resting on her. What if I can't help? What if I'm not who you think I am? Then you will have tried, the chief said simply, and that is more than we have now. She picked up the small deerskin dress from the bundle, holding it against herself. It would probably fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, waiting all these years. The beadwork was exquisite, each tiny bead placed with care and precision. She could almost imagine her real mother working on it by firelight, stitching love and hope into every single thread. Your name, the chief said, his voice soft. Your real name is Wakanda. It means mystical power, but a power that comes from within, from understanding and compassion, not from magic or spirits, the power that comes from knowing who you are and choosing to help others. Willa tested the name on her tongue. Wakanda. It felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like a song she had heard long ago in a dream. Will I see your daughter again? The girl I helped? Ayana is waiting for you at our camp. She has been asking for her rescuer since dawn. She wants to thank you properly." The chief paused, a strange look on his face. "She also wants to show you something. Something about the river crossing that even I do not fully understand." A new mystery. Willa realized that no matter what she chose, there would always be more questions, more secrets to uncover. But for the first time in 3 long, lonely years, she wouldn't be facing them alone. "I need to pack," she said quietly. The chief nodded. "Take only what matters to you. We have clothes, food, shelter. What you need now cannot be carried in your hands." Willa moved through the cabin like a sleepwalker, selecting the few items that held memories worth preserving. The wooden bowl, a faded letter her adoptive mother had written to her father before they came west, a small, smooth stone from the riverbank that she had always thought was pretty. As she gathered these last remnants of her old life, she felt something shifting inside her chest. Not fear, exactly, but anticipation, mixed with a strange and powerful sense of homecoming. Outside, she could hear the warriors preparing for travel. The sound of leather creaking, horses snorting softly, quiet conversations in Lakota. And her ears were beginning to pick up individual words, words that made sense without her understanding how. When she emerged from the cabin with her small bundle, the chief was waiting with a horse. Not a fierce war pony like the others rode, but a gentle mare with kind, intelligent eyes and a soft mouth. "She was your mother's horse," he said. "Her name is Wikapi Star. She has been waiting for you just as long as we have." Willa approached the mare carefully, extending a hesitant hand. The horse nickered softly and nuzzled her palm as if recognizing something familiar, a scent carried on the wind for 12 years. As Willa swung herself onto the horse's back, she felt a connection she had never experienced before. Not magical, but deep and natural, like coming home after a very long journey. "Are you ready, Wakanda?" the chief asked. Willa looked back at her cabin one last time, a tiny speck against the vast wilderness. Then she looked forward, toward the unknown path that wound into the forest. "Yes," she said, and for the first time, she truly meant it. But as they began to ride away, their column a silent procession moving into the deep woods, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above. A man with cold, calculating eyes and a long rifle who had been tracking the war party since dawn. A man who had very different plans for the girl they called Wakanda. The forest path wound deeper into the mountains than Willa had ever traveled. The trees grew taller, the air thinner. The warriors rode in a protective diamond formation around her, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line for threats she couldn't see. Chief Takakota rode beside her, his presence a comforting, solid wall. He occasionally pointed out landmarks and shared stories about her mother that felt like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their places in her mind. Ayana was fearless, he told her, as they navigated a narrow, treacherous trail along a cliff face. She would climb the highest peaks just to gather healing plants that grew nowhere else. She said the best medicine always required the greatest risk. Willa gripped her reins tighter as Wikapi Star picked her way carefully along the rocky path, hundreds of feet above a roaring river. "What kind of sickness is affecting your people? You said your healers couldn't cure it." The chief's expression darkened, the lines on his face deepening. "It started 3 moons ago, a fever that comes and goes, leaving people weak and confused. Their minds wander, but it is not like any sickness we have seen before. It affects only certain families, certain bloodlines. It seems to be spreading in a pattern that makes no natural sense." "What do you mean, a pattern?" "The families that are getting sick," he said, his voice low and grim, "are all related to our medicine people, the healers, the plant gatherers, the story keepers, the ones who keep our traditional knowledge alive. It is as if someone is deliberately targeting those who preserve our ways." A chill ran down Willa's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Do you think someone is poisoning them? Chief Takakota was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the opposite ridge. There are men who would profit if our people became weak and desperate. Men who want our land for the gold they believe lies beneath it. If they could eliminate our healers, destroy our knowledge, and force us to depend on their medicine, their traders, their way of life. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Willa understood the horrifying implications. And you think I can help stop this? I think you may be our only hope of understanding what is really happening. You know both worlds, Wakanda. You think like them, but your heart belongs with us. You might see something our healers have missed. As they rode deeper into the wilderness, Willa found herself remembering skills she didn't know she possessed. She noticed which plants grew in which types of soil. She recognized which animal tracks indicated fresh water nearby. She understood which bird calls meant danger was approaching. It was knowledge that felt instinctive, inherited, as natural and unconscious as breathing. She looked at a patch of small purple flowers. That one is for fever, a voice in her head whispered. But only the leaves, never the root. How far is your camp? She asked, a new urgency in her voice. We will reach it before nightfall. But Wakanda, there is something you must know before we arrive. He reined his horse closer to hers. Our people have been waiting for you for 12 years. The prophecy of your return is all that has given them hope through this sickness. They believe you are the answer to all our troubles. Willa felt the familiar, crushing weight of expectation settling on her shoulders again. What if I disappoint them? Then you will disappoint them, the chief said simply, but you will do so honestly, as yourself. That is all anyone can ask. They crested a high ridge, and the chief suddenly raised his hand, his body tensing. He signaled the entire party to a halt. In the distance, in the valley that held their camp, a thick column of smoke was rising from what should have been empty forest. It was too much smoke for a normal cooking fire. It was too black, too oily for wood burning cleanly. That is coming from our camp, one of the warriors said, his voice sharp with alarm. Chief Takakota's face went pale beneath his paint. We are still 2 hours away. That's smoke. It should not be visible from here unless... He didn't finish the thought, but Willa could see the raw fear in his eyes. Unless what? She demanded, her own heart beginning to race. Unless something is burning that should not burn. Unless someone has attacked while we were away. The chief spurred his horse forward, and the entire party broke into a thunderous gallop. As they raced toward the rising smoke, Willa couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that their journey to find her had been deliberately timed. That someone had wanted the warriors, the camp's best defenders, to be far, far away for exactly this purpose. And behind them, on the ridge they had just left, the man with the long rifle lowered his spyglass and smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The smell hit them first. It wasn't just wood smoke. It was something acrid and chemical that burned their nostrils and made the horses snort and shy away nervously. As they thundered down the final slope toward the camp, Willa could see figures running chaotically between the lodges. Some carried buckets of water from the stream, a futile effort against the inferno. Others were dragging belongings, children, and the elderly away from the spreading flames. The medicine lodge, Chief Takakota breathed, his voice filled with a horror so profound it was almost a whisper. They burned our medicine lodge. The great structure that had been the heart of their healing traditions, the library of their ancestral knowledge, was now a roaring, blackened skeleton against the afternoon sky. Warriors and women worked frantically to prevent the fire from spreading to the other dwellings, but Willa could see they were fighting more than just flames. The smoke carried an oily, unnatural quality that spoke of accelerants, of something deliberately poured to make the fire burn hotter and faster. As they rode into the devastated camp, people rushed toward them, their faces a mixture of relief and absolute terror. An elderly woman grabbed Chief Takakota's horse by the bridle, her words tumbling out in a torrent of panicked Lakota. Willa found herself understanding more than she should have, catching fragments about strangers, about threats, and about something terrible that had happened to the children. "Where is Ayanna?" the chief demanded, dismounting before his horse even stopped. "Safe," the woman assured him. "But others are not. The sickness struck again during the night, harder than before. 3 more children fell ill, and old Noatak. He collapsed and has not woken." Willa slid down from Wakapi Star's back, her legs unsteady from the hard, desperate ride. Around her, the devastation was worse than it had appeared from a distance. Not only was the medicine lodge a total loss, but someone had systematically trampled the healing gardens next to it, scattering precious, irreplaceable plants and roots across the dirt. Months, perhaps years, of carefully cultivated medicine had been utterly ruined in a single night of calculated destruction. "This was not an accident," she said quietly, her voice trembling with a cold fury. Chief Takakota nodded grimly, his eyes sweeping over the wreckage of his people's hope. "Someone wanted to ensure that even if we found you, we would have no traditional medicines left to work with. No plants, no prepared remedies, no sacred space for healing." A small figure broke away from a group near the remaining lodges and ran toward them. It was Ayanna, the girl Willa had carried across the river. She moved with no trace of the limp that had crippled her just yesterday. She threw herself into her father's arms, then turned to look at Willa, her dark eyes sparkling with a mixture of recognition and profound gratitude. "You came," Ayanna said in clear English. "I knew you would come." "How is your leg?" Willa asked, kneeling to examine the girl's movements. "Yesterday you could barely walk." Ayanna flexed her leg experimentally, a look of wonder on her face. "It stopped hurting after you carried me across the water. The swelling went down during the night, and this morning, it felt completely normal, like it was never hurt at all." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's the thing I wanted to show you. It wasn't just the crossing. When you touched me, it was like warmth spread from your hands, all the way down my leg. It pushed the pain out." Willa frowned, a new, unsettling possibility taking root in her mind. A sprained ankle might heal quickly. A shattered bone healing overnight was a miracle. But this sounded like something else entirely. Before she could process it, she looked back at the chief. "Can you show me the sick children? I want to see their symptoms myself." He led her toward one of the larger lodges that had been spared the fire. But before they could enter, a shout rang out from the forest edge. One of the warriors who had stayed behind as a guard came running toward them, his face flushed with a terrible urgency. "Chief, we found tracks, boot prints, not moccasins, and something else." He held up a small, clear glass vial, now empty but still reeking of the same chemical smell that hung in the smoke. "We found several of these hidden near the spring that feeds the camp." The pieces clicked together in Willa's mind with sickening, horrifying clarity. "Someone has been poisoning your water supply," she said, the words feeling like ice in her mouth. "That's why the sickness affects only certain families, the ones living closest to the spring. It's not a pattern of bloodlines. It's a pattern of geography. They're targeting specific groups deliberately." Chief Takakota's face hardened into a mask of controlled, murderous rage. "And now they have destroyed our traditional remedies to ensure we cannot treat the poisoning ourselves." "But who would do this?" Ayanna asked, her young voice filled with a confusion that broke Willa's heart. "Who would hurt children?" Before anyone could answer, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the air. Splinters exploded from a wooden post just inches from Chief Takakota's head. On the ridge above the camp, silhouetted against the sky, Willa could see the figure of a man with a long rifle. Her blood ran cold as she realized that everything that had happened had been a carefully, cruelly orchestrated trap. The man who had been watching them was no longer content to observe. And whatever he wanted, He was clearly willing to kill for it. Chief Takakota grabbed Willa and Ayana, pulling them behind the relative safety of the nearest lodge as another rifle shot splintered the ground where they had been standing. The warriors scattered instantly, taking defensive positions while shouting orders in Lakota to get the women and children to safety inside the remaining dwellings. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the wooden wall, her mind racing to understand the nightmare that was unfolding. "Who is that?" she gasped, pointing toward the ridge where the shooter waited with unnerving patience. "Marcus Brennan," Chief Takakota said grimly, checking the action on his own rifle. "A land speculator. He's been trying to force us off this territory for 2 years. He claims there is gold in these mountains and he's obsessed with it." Another shot rang out, this one followed by a voice that carried clearly across the valley, amplified by the surrounding hills. "Chief Takakota, I know you can hear me. Send out the white girl, and we can discuss this like civilized men." Ice formed in Willa's stomach. The man knew exactly who she was and why she was here. "He's been watching us. He knows about me." "More than that," the chief said, his voice dangerously low. "He orchestrated everything. The poisoning, the timing of our journey to find you, the destruction of our medicine lodge. He wanted to ensure we would be desperate enough to hand you over." "But why does he want me?" Chief Takakota's expression was grim. "Because you represent hope to our people. As long as they believe in the prophecy, as long as they believe you can heal them, they will stay and fight for this land. But if you disappear or die, they will lose their faith. They will abandon the land he wants to claim." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Brennan hadn't just been poisoning the tribe's water supply randomly. He had been targeting the healers and medicine people specifically, creating a crisis that only a prophesied savior could solve. Then he had waited for them to seek out their legendary lost daughter, knowing they would leave the camp vulnerable while they retrieved her. It was a plan of breathtaking cruelty. "How many men does he have?" Willa asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Unknown. But he's been planning this for months. The chemicals in those vials, the way he knew exactly when we would be away from camp, the systematic destruction of our medical supplies. This is not the work of one man." Ayana crawled toward them from behind another lodge, her face pale but determined. "Father, I can see movement in the trees behind him, on the other side of the ridge, at least 6 men with rifles." Willa closed her eyes, trying to think, to force the panic down. 7 armed men against the handful of warriors who remained in camp. The odds were not good, especially with sick children and elders to protect. But there was something else bothering her, something about the way Brennan had called out to them. "He said he wanted to discuss this," she said slowly. "That means he doesn't just want to kill us all. He needs something from us." "He needs witnesses," Chief Takakota said bitterly. "Survivors, who can be forced to tell the territorial authorities whatever story serves his purposes. That they were attacked by hostile natives, for example." A cold, hard determination began to settle over Willa. 3 years of living alone had taught her one thing above all else. Sometimes the only way to survive is to take risks that seem impossible. What if I go out there? What if I talk to him? Absolutely not. "Think about it," she pressed, her mind working faster than it ever had before. "He went to all this trouble to get me here. That means I have value to him alive. If I can get close enough, maybe I can learn what he really wants, what his full plan is." Chief Takakota studied her face, his own expression a storm of conflict, weighing the terrible choices before them. "And if you're wrong? If he simply kills you? Then you fight without me, the same as you would if I stayed hidden." Willa looked toward the ridge where Brennan waited, a patient predator. "But if I'm right, if I can buy you time or information, maybe we can find a way out of this that doesn't end with everyone dead." Ayana grabbed her arm, her small fingers digging into Willa's skin. "Please don't go. We just found you." Willa covered the girl's hand with her own, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone else to be brave too. She turned back to Chief Takakota. I'm going out there, but I need you to promise me something. What? No matter what happens to me, you find a way to get those chemical vials to someone who can identify the poison, someone in the white settlements who can create an antidote. Your people don't have to die from this. Chief Takakota nodded slowly, a look of grudging admiration in his eyes. You have your mother's courage, Wakanda, and her stubborn refusal to consider the possibility of failure. Willa stood up and, before she could lose her nerve, stepped away from the protection of the lodge. Let's hope I also have her luck. Willa walked slowly toward the center of the camp, her hands raised to show she was unarmed, but her mind was sharp and focused, observing every detail. Marcus Brennan descended from the ridge with 3 of his men, their rifles trained on her, but their faces showing an arrogant confidence that made her stomach clench. He was a large, imposing man with cold gray eyes and the kind of cruel smile that never reached them. Miss Willa, I presume, he said, stopping about 20 feet away. Or should I say Wakanda? I've heard so much about you. What do you want, Brennan? Willa asked, keeping her voice as steady as she could. A simple business transaction, he said, with a dismissive shrug. You see, I've invested a considerable amount of time and money in acquiring this land. The problem is, these people won't leave voluntarily, but if their prophesied healer were to disappear, or better yet, publicly renounce them and join civilized society, well, that would solve my problem very nicely. Willa felt her anger building, a hot, protective fire in her chest. So you poisoned children, to force them to need me. Brennan chuckled, a low, ugly sound. A small amount of mercury in their water supply, easily treatable with the right medicine, which I am prepared to provide in exchange for your cooperation, but fatal if left alone. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. And if you refuse, then the children die. And I tell the territorial authorities that I was forced to defend myself against a hostile tribe that was holding a white girl captive. Either way, I get the land. But Willa had been listening to more than his words. She had been watching his men, noting their positions, their weapons, their overconfidence, and she had noticed something Brennan had missed. While he was talking, while all eyes were on her, Chief Takakota's warriors had been moving, silently, carefully, using the thick, oily smoke from the burned lodge as cover. There's one problem with your plan, Willa said loudly, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the small valley. The chemical you used isn't just mercury. Brennan frowned. What are you talking about, girl? I lived with white people for 9 years. I know about industrial chemicals because my adoptive father worked in the mines. What you put in their water is mercury, yes, but it's mixed with arsenic and lead compounds from the mine tailings. That's why it's affecting people so strangely, why it targets certain families, but not others. Different people have different tolerances to different heavy metals. She took a step closer, gambling everything on her next words. But here's what you didn't know. Those metals accumulate in the body, and when they reach critical levels, they become deadly to anyone who's been exposed, including you and your men, who have been drinking from the same water sources for weeks while you watched this camp. The lie came out smoothly, confidently. She saw a flicker of doubt in Brennan's cold eyes. That's impossible. Is it? Willa pressed, her gaze shifting to one of his men, a lanky man who kept rubbing his temples. When did you start getting those headaches? When did your hands start shaking slightly? Look at your men, Brennan. Really look at them. 2 of his men glanced at each other nervously. The lanky man dropped his hand from his head as if he'd been burned. Willa pressed her advantage, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. The only antidote is a specific combination of plants that grow only in these mountains. Plants that only the tribal healers know how to prepare. Plants that you destroyed when you burned their medicine lodge. You're lying, Brennan snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Willa said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Are you willing to bet your life on it? In that single perfect moment of doubt and confusion, Chief Takakota's warriors struck. They rose from concealment on three sides, a silent, deadly ring of warriors surrounding Brennan's small group, their rifles all ready. The land speculator spun around, his face a mask of shock and fury, realizing far too late that his careful, cruel plan had completely unraveled. Drop your weapons, Chief Takakota commanded, his rifle aimed squarely at Brennan's chest. The fight was over before it ever began. Faced with certain death, Brennan's men threw down their rifles and raised their hands in surrender. Brennan himself stood frozen, his face white with a mixture of impotent rage and stark terror. You have two choices, Willa told him, her voice now as hard as steel. You can help us identify exactly what chemicals you used so we can treat the poisoning properly, or you can take your chances with territorial justice when we turn you in for attempted genocide. 3 hours later, the captured vials had been sent with two of the fastest warriors to the nearest trading post, where a doctor could analyze them and send back the proper treatment. Brennan and his men sat tied and under guard, their elaborate plan shattered by a 12-year-old girl who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a rifle, but information used at exactly the right moment. As the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the recovering camp, Willa sat beside the campfire with Chief Takakota and Ayana, finally understanding what it meant to belong somewhere. She was no longer the lost orphan by the river, nor was she simply the mythical returning healer of a prophecy. She was Wakanda, and she had found her place by choosing to fight for the people she now called her own. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. We've got more tales of the untamed frontier coming your way, stories of courage, survival, and the hidden heroes who shaped the West. And if you really loved it, consider leaving a comment below to let us know what you think happened to Willa next. Your support means everything to us.